Robert Chen wiped down the same marble staircase for the 1,000th time, his worn mop moving in practice circles across the gleaming floor. 12 years he'd been doing this. 12 years of watching expensive shoes click past him without a single glance downward. To the students of Riverside Academy, he might as well have been invisible. The clock on the wall showed 6:30 in the evening. Most of the kids had gone home hours ago, picked up by drivers in cars that cost more than Robert would make in 5 years. But he didn't mind the quiet. In fact, he preferred it. The empty hallways meant he could work in peace, and sometimes, if he was lucky, he'd hear music drifting from the practice rooms. Robert had always loved music. As a kid growing up in a small apartment above his parents' restaurant, he'd listened to everything from classical radio to jazz records his uncle would bring over. He couldn't afford lessons, never learned to read sheet music, but he could always feel it. Music made sense to him in a way that words sometimes didn't. He pushed his cleaning cart down the east corridor, past the trophy cases filled with golden statues and framed certificates. This was the music wing, where the school kept its grand pianos and fancy instruments. The spring gala was coming up in 2 months, and already he'd seen the entitled kids fighting over audition slots, like it was some kind of competition for their parents' approval. That's when he noticed her again. The girl sat alone on a bench near the water fountain, her knees pulled up to her chest, scribbling something in a beat-up notebook. She'd been there yesterday, too, and the day before that. Always alone. Always writing. Robert knew her face from the cafeteria. While other students sat in loud groups laughing and showing off their phones, this girl ate her lunch in the corner with a book propped in front of her. He'd never heard her speak. Not once. "Excuse me," Robert said gently, not wanting to startle her. "Building closes at 7. You got someone picking you up?" The girl looked up, and for a second Robert saw something in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but surprise. Like she wasn't used to people talking to her directly. She shook her head and quickly gathered her things. As she stood, her notebook slipped from her lap and fell open on the floor. Robert bent down to pick it up, and that's when he saw it. The pages weren't filled with words. They were covered in hand-drawn musical notes, staff sketched with a ballpoint pen, measures carefully counted out. Some pages had lyrics written in small, careful handwriting. "You write music?" Robert asked, handing the notebook back. The girl's cheeks flushed red. She grabbed the notebook and hugged it to her chest, nodding just barely. "That's really something," Robert said with a genuine smile. "You play too?" She hesitated, then shook her head no. But her eyes betrayed her. They drifted toward the practice rooms down the hall with such longing that Robert felt it in his chest. "Well," he said, "those rooms are empty most evenings after 6. Shame to let those pianos sit there collecting dust." The girl's eyes widened. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she just nodded once more and hurried toward the exit. Robert watched her go, this quiet girl with music in her notebook and sadness in her eyes. Something about her reminded him of himself at that age, wanting something so badly it hurt, but convinced it wasn't meant for people like him. Over the next week, Robert paid more attention. He learned her name was Maya Santos from the attendance sheet he glimpsed while cleaning the main office. Scholarship student, lived across town, no father listed, mother worked at the hospital on double shifts, the kind of kid who was at Riverside because of good grades and better luck, surrounded by kids whose parents bought buildings and named them after themselves. He noticed other things too. How the other students didn't exactly bully Maya, but they didn't see her either. She'd stand at the edge of groups, never quite belonging. In music class, she'd watch the other students practice with an intensity that made Robert's heart ache. Her fingers would move slightly like she was playing along to music only she could hear. One Thursday evening, Robert was buffing the floors in the music hall when he heard it. At first, he thought maybe he'd left a radio on somewhere. But no, this was different. This was live. Someone was playing the piano in practice room 3. He walked quietly down the hall and stopped outside the door, which had been left open just a crack. Through the gap, he could see Maya sitting at the old upright piano in the corner. Not the fancy grand piano that the star students used, The forgotten one with the chipped keys that the school probably should have thrown out years ago. She was playing something Robert had never heard before. It wasn't perfect. Her technique was rough, self-taught. But there was something in the way she played that grabbed him by the throat and wouldn't let go. The melody was sad and hopeful at the same time, like someone remembering something beautiful that they'd lost. Robert stood there for 15 minutes, his mop forgotten, just listening. When Maya finally stopped, he saw her wipe tears from her eyes. She sat there for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, and then she noticed the door was open. She turned and saw Robert standing there. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice so quiet he barely heard it. "I didn't mean to, I was just—" "Don't apologize," Robert said quickly. "That was beautiful, really beautiful. How long have you been playing?" Maya stood up from the bench, gathering her things in a rush. "I shouldn't be in here. I don't have permission." "Wait," Robert said. "I'm not going to tell anyone, I just— Where did you learn to play like that?" Maya stopped at the door. For a moment, Robert thought she'd just leave without answering. But then she spoke, her voice still barely above a whisper. "YouTube videos, the library computers. Sometimes I'd watch through the window when other kids had lessons." She looked down at her feet. "I've never actually had a real lesson." Robert felt something shift in his chest. This girl had taught herself to play like that? With no teacher, no expensive lessons, just determination and whatever scraps of learning she could find? "The spring gala," Robert said suddenly. "You ever think about auditioning?" Maya laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's not for kids like me. You have to be invited. You have to be someone." "You are someone," Robert said firmly. "You're someone with real talent. That's more than most of these kids can say." Maya looked at him with those sad old eyes. "You don't understand. This school, it's not about talent. It's about whose parents donate the most money. It's about having the right last name." She adjusted her backpack straps. "People like me? We're just lucky to be here. We don't get to perform at the gala." She left before Robert could respond, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. But as he went back to his cleaning, pushing his mop across floors that rich kids would dirty again tomorrow, Robert couldn't stop thinking about what he'd heard. That girl had something special, something real. And if 12 years of working at Riverside Academy had taught him anything, it was that real talent was a lot rarer than money. Maybe, he thought, it was time someone gave Maya Santos a chance. Even if he had to make that chance himself. Robert couldn't get the sound out of his head. 3 days had passed since he'd heard Maya play, and the melody still haunted him during his shifts. He'd catch himself humming it while mopping floors, remembering the way her fingers had moved across those chipped piano keys like she was speaking a language she'd been forced to keep secret. He started paying closer attention to the building's schedule. The audition sign-up sheet for the spring gala hung outside the music director's office, and every day Robert walked past it, he saw the same names. Children of lawyers and doctors and tech executives. Kids who'd had private lessons since they were 5 years old. Not a single name that didn't come with a hefty tuition check attached. On Friday afternoon, while emptying trash cans in the administrative wing, Robert overheard Mrs. Patricia Holloway talking on the phone. She was the music director, a stern woman in her 60s who wore her gray hair in a tight bun and treated the spring gala like it was Carnegie Hall. "Yes, we have 17 auditions scheduled," she said into her phone. "All exceptional students from excellent families. This year's gala should raise at least $2 million for the new arts center." Robert felt his jaw tighten. Excellent families. That's what it always came down to, wasn't it? Not excellent talent. Not passion or dedication. Just the right last name and the right bank account. That evening, he found Maya in her usual spot by the water fountain. She was doing homework, her textbook spread across the bench, earbuds in. Robert noticed the phone she was using was old. The screen cracked in one corner. Probably a hand-me-down. He approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt. When Maya looked up and saw him, she pulled out her earbuds. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly. It surprised him that she knew his name. Most students didn't. "You can call me Robert," he said, sitting down on the opposite end of the bench. "Listen, I've been thinking about what you said." "About the gala." Maya's expression closed off immediately. I told you that's not for people like me. What if it could be? Robert leaned forward. I've been working here 12 years. I know how things run. The audition period ends Monday, but there's always 1 or 2 slots that open up last minute. Kids get sick or their families go on vacation or they decide they're not ready. So, Maya started packing up her books, clearly uncomfortable with where this was going. So, I could talk to Mrs. Holloway. Tell her we've got a student who deserves a chance. Get you an audition slot. Maya stood up abruptly. No, absolutely not. Do you know what would happen? I'd walk in there and they'd take one look at me and laugh. I don't have the right clothes. I don't have sheet music from some famous composer. I just have... She trailed off, her voice cracking slightly. You have something real, Robert finished for her. That's worth more than all their fancy preparation. Maya shook her head, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. You're nice, Mr. Chen, but you don't get it. Even if I did audition, even if by some miracle they liked what I played, my mom would never be able to afford the dress for the actual performance. Or time off work to come watch. It would just be humiliating for both of us. She walked away before Robert could respond, leaving him sitting alone on the bench with her words echoing in his mind. But Robert Chen hadn't survived 12 years of being invisible by giving up easily. That weekend, he did something he hadn't done in months. He went down to his building's basement storage unit and dug through boxes until he found what he was looking for. His wife Linda's old dresses. She'd passed away 4 years ago from cancer, and Robert hadn't been able to part with her clothes yet. But Linda had always been about the same size as Maya, and she'd kept one beautiful black dress for special occasions. Simple, elegant, timeless. The kind of dress that wouldn't look out of place at a gala, even if it came from a department store instead of a boutique. On Monday morning, Robert arrived at work 2 hours early. He'd pressed the dress and hung it in a garment bag. He'd also stopped by the music store and picked up blank sheet music paper. If Maya needed something that looked official, he'd help her create it. But first, he needed to get her that audition slot. Mrs. Holloway arrived at 7:30, like always. Robert had timed his floor cleaning to coincide with her morning coffee run. He intercepted her in the hallway, his heart pounding. Mrs. Holloway, could I have a moment? She looked surprised. In 12 years, Robert had maybe spoken to her a handful of times, and never about anything important. Mr. Chen, I'm quite busy preparing for auditions today. That's actually what I wanted to talk about, Robert said, trying to keep his voice steady. I know you're looking for exceptional talent for the gala, and I think I found someone you need to hear. Mrs. Holloway raised an eyebrow. You found talent? Robert pushed down the irritation he felt at her tone. There's a student here, Maya Santos. Scholarship student. She's been teaching herself piano and she's remarkable. Really remarkable. I was hoping you might have room for one more audition. Mrs. Holloway's expression shifted to something between confusion and condescension. Mr. Chen, the spring gala auditions are by invitation only. We select students based on their academic standing, their musical background, and frankly, their family's involvement with the school. I'm not familiar with this Santos girl, which means she hasn't been flagged by any of our music teachers. Maybe she hasn't been noticed because nobody's been paying attention, Robert said, more forcefully than he intended. Just give her 10 minutes. If you don't think she's worthy, then that's the end of it. Mrs. Holloway studied him for a long moment. This is highly irregular. I understand that. But what's the harm? You've got 17 auditions today. What's one more? Something in Mrs. Holloway's expression softened, just slightly. Maybe she was curious. Maybe she felt sorry for the janitor making an unusual request. Or maybe Robert hoped she actually cared about finding real talent. Fine, she said finally. 4 o'clock this afternoon. Room 212, 10 minutes, not a second more. And Mr. Chen? This better not be a waste of my time. Robert felt a rush of relief and terror at the same time. He'd gotten Maya the audition. Now he just had to convince her to show up. Finding Maya wasn't hard. She always spent lunch period in the library, tucked away in the reference section where other students rarely went. Robert found her there eating a sandwich while reading a book about Chopin. I got you an audition, he said without preamble. Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide. What? No, I told you at 4 o'clock. Room 212, 10 minutes to show them what you can do. Robert sat down across from her. I know you're scared. I know you think you don't belong. But Maya, I've been listening to music my whole life, and what I heard you play the other night, that was special. That was the kind of thing people pay hundreds of dollars to hear in concert halls. You had no right, Maya said, but her voice wavered. You're absolutely right. I didn't. And if you don't want to do it, you can just not show up. Mrs. Holloway will think I'm crazy, and that'll be the end of it. Robert pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. But if you do show up, I have something for you. He handed her the paper. It was a hand-drawn flyer he'd made with the words, "You are worthy," written across the top, and below it, the time and room number. Maya stared at the paper, her hands trembling slightly. I don't have anything prepared. I don't even know what I'd play. Play what you played the other night, Robert said. Play what's in your heart. That's all they need to hear. Maya sat there in silence for what felt like forever. Students passed by their table, chattering about weekend plans and upcoming tests, completely unaware of the moment happening in their midst. Finally, Maya looked up at Robert. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. If I do this and it goes terribly, I'm blaming you. Robert smiled. Fair enough. What he didn't tell her was that he'd already decided. If Maya walked into that audition room and Mrs. Holloway didn't see what Robert saw, then maybe Riverside Academy didn't deserve her at all. But at least she'd have her chance. At least someone would have finally noticed her. And sometimes being noticed is the bravest thing you can do. The clock in the hallway showed 3:45. Robert had been watching it for the last 20 minutes, his stomach twisted in knots. He'd finished his cleaning duties early and positioned himself near room 212, pretending to fix a loose tile on the wall. In reality, he was waiting to see if Maya would actually show up. Through the small window in the door, he could see Mrs. Holloway sitting at a table with two other people, Mr. Gregory Walsh, the assistant music director, and Mrs. Chen, no relation to Robert, who taught music theory and had a reputation for being even tougher than Mrs. Holloway. They were reviewing papers, probably notes from the morning auditions. 3:50. Still no Maya. Robert felt his hope starting to crack. Maybe he'd pushed too hard. Maybe Maya had decided the risk wasn't worth it. He couldn't blame her. Walking into that room would take more courage than most people had to give. 3:55. Then he saw her. Maya came around the corner walking so slowly, it looked like each step hurt. She was wearing her school uniform, the white shirt tucked neatly into the plaid skirt, her shoes scuffed but clean. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she clutched that worn notebook against her chest like a shield. When she saw Robert, she stopped. For a second, he thought she might turn around and run. I can't do this, she whispered. Robert walked over to her, keeping his voice low and calm. Yes, you can. You know why? Because you already did the hard part. You taught yourself to play. You found the music inside you when nobody was helping you, when nobody even knew you existed. Walking through that door, that's the easy part. What if I mess up? What if my hands shake and I can't remember anything? Then you mess up, Robert said simply. But at least you tried. At least you didn't spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened if you'd been brave enough to walk through that door. Maya took a shaky breath. She looked down at her notebook, then back up at Robert. Will you wait here? While I'm in there? I'm not going anywhere, Robert promised. Maya nodded once, then walked to the door. She raised her hand to knock, hesitated, then knocked anyway. 3 soft taps that sounded like thunder in the quiet hallway. Come in, Mrs. Holloway's voice called out. Maya opened the door and stepped inside. Robert moved to where he could see through the window, his heart hammering. He watched Mrs. Holloway look up, her expression shifting from neutral to confused. She clearly hadn't expected this nervous girl in a regular uniform. The other 2 judges exchanged glances that Robert could read even from the hallway. They were already dismissing her. Maya stood just inside the door, looking small and out of place. Mrs. Holloway said something Robert couldn't hear through the thick door. Maya responded, her voice so quiet the judges had to lean forward to catch her words. Mrs. Holloway gestured toward the piano in the corner. An old upright, not unlike the one Maya had been practicing on. Maya walked to it slowly, set her notebook down on top, and sat on the bench. For a long moment, she just sat there. Her hands hovered over the keys but didn't touch them. Robert could see her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. The judges watched her with varying degrees of patience. Mr. Walsh glanced at his watch. Come on, Robert thought. You can do this. Maya's hands finally lowered to the keys. She closed her eyes. And then she began to play. Robert couldn't hear the music through the door, but he could see everything. He could see Maya's body language transform from terrified to focused. He could see her fingers moving across the keys with growing confidence. He could see her swaying slightly with the rhythm, lost in whatever melody she was creating. More importantly, he could see the judge's reactions. Mrs. Holloway's pen, which had been poised to take notes, slowly lowered to the table, her mouth opened slightly. Mr. Walsh, who had been slouching in his chair looking bored, sat up straight. Mrs. Chen actually leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Maya with an intensity that made Robert's breath catch. Maya played for maybe 4 minutes, though it felt longer. When she finished, she opened her eyes and looked at the judges with an expression that was part hope, part terror. Her hands were shaking as she pulled them back into her lap. Robert watched Mrs. Holloway say something. Maya responded, her voice small. Mrs. Holloway said something else, and Maya's head dropped. She was staring at her lap now, and Robert's heart sank. They were dismissing her. They were probably being polite about it, but they were sending her away. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. Chen stood up and walked over to the piano. She said something to Maya that made the girl look up in surprise. Mrs. Chen gestured to the keys, asking a question. Maya nodded and played something short, maybe 10 seconds of music. Mrs. Chen smiled, actually smiled, and said something else. The conversation continued for another minute before Mrs. Holloway finally stood, indicating the audition was over. Maya gathered her notebook, gave a small bow that looked like she'd seen it in a movie, and walked toward the door. Robert quickly stepped back, pretending to examine the tile again. When Maya emerged from the room, her face was unreadable. "Well?" Robert asked, unable to contain himself. Maya walked past him without answering, her steps quick. Robert followed her down the hallway around the corner, until they reached the empty stairwell. Only then did Maya stop. She turned to face him, and Robert saw tears streaming down her face. His heart plummeted. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have pushed you." "I thought—" She said yes, Maya interrupted, her voice breaking. Robert froze. "What?" "Mrs. Holloway, she said I can perform at the gala." Maya let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She said what I played was the most emotionally honest piece she'd heard in 20 years of teaching. She asked me who my composer was, and when I told her I wrote it myself, she just stared at me. Robert felt his own eyes getting wet. "Maya, that's incredible. Mrs. Chen wants to give me lessons. Free lessons. She said I have raw talent that shouldn't be wasted." Maya wiped at her face with the back of her hand. Mr. Walsh asked if I had more original compositions, and I showed him my notebook. He said I should be writing all of them down properly, that they're worth preserving. She looked at Robert with an expression of complete disbelief. "This doesn't happen to people like me. Things like this don't happen." "Yes, they do," Robert said firmly, "when you're talented and brave enough to let people see it. You did this, Maya, not me. I just opened a door. You walked through it." Maya suddenly stepped forward and hugged him. It was quick and awkward, and Robert wasn't sure what to do with his hands, but it was also one of the most genuine moments he'd experienced in years. "Thank you," Maya whispered. "Thank you for seeing me." Before Robert could respond, they heard footsteps. Mrs. Holloway appeared at the top of the stairs, slightly out of breath from rushing after them. "Miss Santos," she called out. "One more thing." Maya pulled away from Robert, wiping her face quickly. "Yes, ma'am?" Mrs. Holloway descended the stairs, her expression serious. "The spring gala is 6 weeks away. That's not much time to prepare. You'll need to refine your piece, work on your stage presence, and honestly, you'll need appropriate attire." She paused, studying Maya carefully. "I understand you're a scholarship student, that you might not have the resources some of our other families have." Maya's face fell slightly. Here it comes, Robert thought. The catch, but Mrs. Holloway surprised them both. "The school has a fund for situations like this. We can provide what you need. I won't have talent go to waste because of something as trivial as a dress code." She handed Maya a business card. "This is Mrs. Chen's information. She'll expect you tomorrow after school for your first lesson. Don't be late." With that, Mrs. Holloway turned and walked back up the stairs, leaving Maya and Robert standing in stunned silence. Maya stared at the business card in her hand like it might disappear if she looked away. "Is this real?" she asked quietly. "Am I dreaming?" Robert smiled. "It's real, and Maya, This is just the beginning. 6 weeks from now, you're going to stand on that stage and show all those rich kids what real music sounds like." Maya looked up at him, and for the first time since Robert had met her, she smiled. A real, genuine, full smile that made her look like the teenager she actually was instead of someone carrying the weight of the world. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good," Robert said. "That means it matters." As Maya left to catch her bus, Robert stood in the empty stairwell thinking about doors and chances and the strange way life works sometimes. He'd come to work that morning thinking it would be just another day of mopping floors and emptying trash cans. Instead, he'd watched someone's whole world change, and in a small way his had too, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is see someone when the rest of the world is looking away. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of changes that neither Robert nor Maya could have predicted. The invisible girl who used to eat lunch alone suddenly found herself at the center of something she never expected. Attention. It started small. Mrs. Chen's lessons happened 3 times a week after school, and Robert would see Maya walking to the music room with a mixture of excitement and nervousness on her face. Sometimes he'd find excuses to clean the hallway outside just to catch glimpses of the lessons through the window. Mrs. Chen was demanding but patient, helping Maya refine her technique without crushing the raw emotion that made her playing special. But it wasn't just the music lessons that changed things. Word had gotten out about the scholarship student who'd impressed the judges. Students who'd never looked at Maya twice suddenly knew her name. Some were genuinely curious, others were less kind. Robert overheard 2 girls talking in the hallway one afternoon while he was changing trash bags. "Can you believe they're letting her perform at the gala?" one of them said, not bothering to lower her voice. "My mom's been donating to this school for 10 years and they chose some charity case over me. I heard she doesn't even have a real dress." The other girl laughed. "Probably going to show up in something from a thrift store." Robert's hands tightened on the trash bag. He wanted to say something to defend Maya, but he knew it would only make things worse. Instead, he made a mental note to check on her later. He found Maya in the library during lunch, same as always, but this time she wasn't alone. A boy Robert recognized from the orchestra sat across from her, talking animatedly about something. When Robert walked by, he heard the boy say, "I'm serious, your composition is better than half the stuff we play in concert. You should submit it to the regional competition." Maya saw Robert and gave him a small wave. She looked tired but happy. The kind of tired that comes from working hard on something you care about rather than just surviving. Things got more complicated in week 3. The gala committee announced the performance lineup at a school assembly. 17 students would perform, and Maya's name was dead last on the list. Robert knew what that meant. The final slot was either for the worst performer or the best, a way to either bury someone or end the night on a high note. He wasn't sure which category they'd put Maya in. After the assembly, Robert found Maya sitting on the steps outside the music wing, her face unreadable. "You okay?" he asked, sitting down beside her. "They put me last," Maya said quietly. "Everyone's saying it's because they want to get all the real performances done before the weird scholarship kid plays." "Or," Robert said, "they're saving the best for last." Maya looked at him with doubt in her eyes. "You don't know that." "No, I don't," Robert admitted. "But I know what I heard when you played. And I know Mrs. Chen doesn't waste her time on students she doesn't believe in. You're last because they want people to remember you." Maya pulled her knees up to her chest. "What if I freeze? What if I get up there in front of all those people and just forget everything?" "Then you'll be human," Robert said simply. "Look, I'm not going to lie to you. Next week is going to be scary. You're going to stand on that stage in front of people who've never had to fight for anything in their lives. People who think they're better than you because of their last names. But you know what? When you start playing, none of that matters. Music is the great equalizer. It doesn't care about your bank account or your address. It only cares about truth." Maya rested her chin on her knees. "My mom finally got the night off work. She's coming to watch." Her voice cracked slightly. "I don't want to embarrass her." "You won't," Robert said firmly. "Trust me." But Robert had his own worries he didn't share with Maya. The school had provided a dress as promised, but when he'd seen it hanging in the music office, his heart had sunk. It was fine, perfectly acceptable, but it was also clearly the plainest dress they had, probably pulled from the back of some donation closet. Next to what the other girls would be wearing, Maya would stand out for all the wrong reasons. That night, Robert went back down to his storage unit. He pulled out Linda's black dress again and held it up to the light. It was simple but elegant, with clean lines and a classic cut that wouldn't look dated. Linda had worn it to her sister's wedding, to job interviews, to every occasion where she needed to feel confident. Robert had the dress dry cleaned and altered by a seamstress in his neighborhood who owed him a favor from helping her son with visa paperwork. When she handed it back to him, it looked perfect. Age-appropriate but sophisticated. The kind of dress that said, "I belong here," without screaming for attention. The hard part was figuring out how to give it to Maya without making her feel like charity. He found his opportunity 4 days before the gala. Maya was practicing in room 212 after her lesson with Mrs. Chen. Robert knocked softly and poked his head in. "Got a minute?" he asked. Maya stopped playing and turned around. "Sure, what's up?" Robert held up the garment bag. "I know the school gave you a dress for the performance, but I wanted to offer you another option." He laid the bag across the piano bench. "This was my wife's. She passed away a few years back, and I've been holding on to her things. But I think she'd want someone to wear this, someone who'd appreciate it." Maya unzipped the bag slowly. When she saw the dress, her hands flew to her mouth. "Mr. Chen, I can't. This is too much." "It's just sitting in a box in my basement," Robert said. Linda loved music. She used to drag me to concerts all the time, even though we could barely afford the tickets. If she knew there was a talented girl who needed a dress to perform in, she'd insist you take it. Maya touched the fabric gently, like it might break. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Try it on. There's a changing room down the hall. If it doesn't fit or you don't like it, no problem. You can wear what the school gave you. No hard feelings." Maya took the dress and disappeared down the hallway. Robert waited, his heart pounding. 5 minutes passed, then 10. He was starting to worry when Maya finally emerged. The dress fit her perfectly. The seamstress had done an amazing job. Maya looked older, more confident, like someone who belonged on a stage. But more than that, she looked comfortable. Not like she was wearing a costume, but like she was wearing armor. "How do I look?" Maya asked, spinning once. "Like a performer," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Maya's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to. I don't have the words." "You don't need words," Robert said. "Just promise me something. Anything. When you get up on that stage, don't play for the judges or the donors or anyone else in that audience. Play for yourself. Play for your mom. Play for every kid who's ever felt invisible." "Can you do that?" Maya nodded, wiping her eyes carefully so she wouldn't smudge her makeup from earlier. "I can do that." The night before the gala, Robert couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if the wealthy parents were dismissive? What if the other students sabotaged Maya somehow? What if all of this had been a mistake and he'd just set her up for public humiliation? But then he remembered the look on Maya's face when she'd played at her audition. The way she'd transformed from terrified to transcendent. The way the music had poured out of her like she'd been holding it in her whole life and finally had permission to let it free. Whatever happened tomorrow night, at least Maya would know that someone had believed in her. Someone had seen her worth when the rest of the world was too busy looking past her. And sometimes, Robert thought as he finally drifted off to sleep, that's enough to change everything. The morning of the gala arrived with perfect weather, sunny but not too hot, with a light breeze that made the banners outside Riverside Academy flutter gently. Robert arrived at work early to help with setup. The auditorium was being transformed into something magical, with flowers and lights and elegant table settings for the donors who'd paid thousands of dollars for their seats. He saw Maya briefly in the afternoon. She was running through a final rehearsal, and even from the back of the auditorium, Robert could hear the power in her playing. She'd come so far in 6 weeks. Mrs. Chen stood in the wings, watching with obvious pride. As the sun began to set and the guests started arriving in their expensive cars and designer clothes, Robert changed out of his work uniform and into his pressed suit. He'd been given a seat in the very back row, a courtesy extended to longtime staff members. He didn't mind. He'd be able to see everything from there, the auditorium filled with the sound of wealth and privilege. Diamond earrings caught the light. Champagne glasses clinked. Programs rustled as people found their seats. Robert watched it all and thought about Maya backstage, wearing Linda's dress, preparing to show all these people what real talent looked like. The lights dimmed, Mrs. Holloway walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. She welcomed everyone, thanked the donors, and explained how tonight's performances represented the finest young musicians in the state. Then the first student walked out, and the gala began. The first 16 performances blurred together in Robert's mind. Each student was technically perfect, playing pieces by Mozart and Bach and Beethoven with practiced precision. The audience applauded politely after each one, then returned to their quiet conversations and champagne. These weren't people here to discover something new. They were here to see their investments perform, to network with other wealthy families, to be seen in the right places. Robert watched it all from his seat in the back row, his leg bouncing nervously. He kept glancing at the program in his hands, at Maya's name printed at the bottom of the list. Maya Santos, original composition. During the intermission, Robert overheard a woman in pearls talking to her husband. Only one more half to sit through, thank God. Jennifer's piece was lovely, wasn't it? Though I still think she should have chosen the Chopin instead. Her husband grunted in agreement. Who's this last performer? Ever heard of the Santos family? Scholarship student, I believe, the woman said with a tone that made it clear what she thought of that. Patricia told me they added her last minute. Some sort of diversity initiative, probably. Robert's hands clenched around his program, but he said nothing. Let them think what they want, he told himself. Maya's playing would speak louder than their assumptions ever could. The lights dimmed again for the second half. 3 more students performed. All flawless, all forgettable. The audience was getting restless now, checking their phones, whispering about after-parties and Monday morning meetings. This was just another obligation on their social calendars, another box to check. Then Mrs. Holloway returned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have one final performance this evening. Our last performer is a remarkable young talent who has been with us for 3 years. Please welcome Maya Santos. The applause was polite but scattered. Robert could feel the energy in the room. People were ready to leave. They'd done their duty, seen their children perform, made their donations. This last piece was just standing between them and the reception. Then Maya walked onto the stage. She moved slowly, carefully, her hands clasped in front of her. The dress Robert had given her caught the stage lights perfectly, simple and elegant. Her hair was pulled back, showing her face clearly. She looked terrified and brave at the same time. Maya sat at the grand piano center stage. For a moment she just sat there, her hands resting in her lap, staring at the keys. The audience grew quieter, confused by the delay. Someone coughed. A program rustled. Robert found himself leaning forward in his seat, silently willing her to start. Come on, Maya, you can do this. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then her hands rose to the keys. The first note cut through the silence like a knife. It wasn't what anyone expected. Not some classical piece everyone had heard 100 times. This was something raw and honest and completely new. The melody started soft, almost fragile, like someone whispering a secret they'd kept their whole life. Robert watched the audience's reaction ripple through the room. People who'd been checking their phones looked up. Conversations died mid-sentence. The woman in pearls who'd dismissed Maya minutes ago leaned forward in her seat, her champagne glass forgotten. Maya's playing built slowly, adding layers of complexity. Her fingers moved across the keys with growing confidence, and the music began to tell a story. Robert could hear it all. The loneliness of being invisible, the pain of wanting something you're told you can't have, the small moments of hope that keep you going, the fear of being seen and the greater fear of staying hidden forever. The melody shifted, became stronger. Maya's whole body moved with the music now, swaying slightly. Her face transformed. She wasn't that scared girl anymore. She was something else entirely. She was the music itself, given form and breath. In the audience, Robert saw a woman wipe her eyes. A man in an expensive suit sat perfectly still, transfixed. The students who'd mocked Maya backstage were silent, their faces showing emotions they probably didn't have words for yet. The music climbed higher, more urgent now, building to something. It spoke of fighting, of refusing to stay invisible, of taking up space in a world that told you that you were too small, too poor, too different to matter. And then, just when it seemed like the music might break apart from the intensity, it shifted again. The melody softened into something beautiful and bittersweet. It was the sound of acceptance. Not giving up, but understanding that being seen comes with its own kind of pain and its own kind of power. The notes fell like rain, like tears, like the first light of morning after the longest night. Maya played the final chord and let it hang in the air, her hands still on the keys, her eyes still closed. The note faded slowly, gradually, until the auditorium was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then from somewhere in the middle of the audience, someone started clapping. Not polite applause. Real clapping. Loud and enthusiastic and genuine. Others joined in. Then more. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on their feet. The sound was deafening, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner of the space. People weren't just clapping. They were cheering, whistling. Some were crying openly. Maya opened her eyes, looking stunned. She stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs and gave a small bow, the way Mrs. Chen had taught her. The applause grew louder. She bowed again, and Robert saw tears streaming down her face. From his seat in the back, Robert was clapping so hard his hands hurt. He didn't care. He wanted Maya to hear him, to know he was there, to understand that this moment was real and earned and completely hers. The ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Mrs. Holloway had to step back onto the stage to gently guide Maya into the wings. And even then, people kept clapping. When Maya finally disappeared backstage, the audience slowly began to sit down, but the energy in the room had completely changed. People were talking excitedly, looking at their programs, trying to figure out who this girl was and where she'd come from. Robert sat back in his chair, exhausted and exhilarated at the same time. He'd been holding his breath without realizing it, and now his chest ached. But more than that, his heart felt full in a way it hadn't in years. Not since Linda was alive and they'd go to concerts together, holding hands in the cheap seats, just grateful to be in the presence of something beautiful. After the formal program ended, Robert made his way through the crowd toward the reception area. He wanted to find Maya, to congratulate her, but the space was packed with donors and parents. He hung back, not wanting to intrude. That's when he saw her. Maya stood near the refreshment table, still in Linda's dress, surrounded by people. Mrs. Holloway was introducing her to a man in an expensive suit who turned out to be from a prestigious music conservatory. Mrs. Chen stood nearby, beaming with pride. And there, holding Maya's hand tightly, was a woman in scrubs who Robert knew must be her mother. She looked exhausted from her hospital shift, but her face shone with joy and tears. Maya looked overwhelmed but happy, nodding politely as people congratulated her. Then her eyes found Robert across the room. Her face lit up, and she excused herself from the crowd, pulling her mother along as she made her way over to him. "Mr. Chen," Maya said breathlessly. "This is my mom, Rosa. Mom, this is the man I told you about, the one who made all this possible." Rosa Santos grabbed Robert's hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion and accent. "Thank you for seeing my daughter, for believing in her when no one else did." "She did all the hard work," Robert said, meaning it. "I just opened a door." "Sometimes," Rosa said, squeezing his hands. "That's all someone needs. Just one person to open a door." Maya hugged Robert again, just like she had after the audition, but this time it lasted longer. "The conservatory man wants to talk about a full scholarship," she whispered, "for next year. He said I'm exactly the kind of student they're looking for." Robert pulled back to look at her face, seeing the disbelief and hope warring there. "See? I told you that you were saving the best for last." "I was so scared," Maya admitted. "Right before I started playing, I almost ran off the stage. But then I remembered what you said. To play for myself. For my mom. For everyone who's ever felt invisible." She wiped her eyes, careful not to smudge her makeup. "So that's what I did." "We heard it," Robert said simply. Everyone in that room heard it. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Robert helped the staff clean up like he always did. He collected programs left on seats, picked up champagne glasses, pushed chairs back into place. His regular work, his regular life, returning after one extraordinary night. But as he worked, he thought about how much had changed in 6 weeks. How one decision to speak up, to notice someone, to take a chance, had rippled out into something bigger than he could have imagined. Maya would go on to that conservatory. She'd perform in concert halls and competition stages. Years from now, program notes would mention that she got her start at a small school gala. But they probably wouldn't mention the janitor who'd heard her playing in an empty practice room, and that was okay. Robert didn't need credit or recognition. He'd already gotten his reward. He'd watched someone blossom. He'd seen the moment when the world finally noticed what he'd known all along, that Maya Santos was extraordinary. As Robert pushed his cleaning cart down the empty hallway later that night, he passed him,